So this is our Facebook group for New Zealand, so we just call it MPN New Zealand Information and Support. Kathy Thomas from Christchurch does a great job at setting this up and running this for us, and it's an area where it hasn't got, there's probably, we're trying to sort of populate it with useful resources and information as we come across stuff, but it's a way to kind of post information and share resources. For instance, a lot of the patient power videos and things we would share via this network to get them to try and get better spread, and a lot of the stuff we see coming out of the UK we'll share via this network and so on as well. So if anybody wants to join, you can. It's a private closed group. You get asked 3 basic questions, which is, do you have an MPN, do you live in New Zealand? What the other one is, but so it is a closed group, and we administer that quite carefully. So what else? And yes, as Donald mentioned, I'm also LBC Leukemia and Blood Cancer here have what's called a consumer advisory board, where they have consumers or patients that help them with their work in terms of where should they focus, where should they put their resources, what sorts of things that they should be doing. They have the unenviable task of trying to look after all sorts of different blood cancers and blood conditions. And as we all know in New Zealand, we're a small country and we haven't got a lot to go around, but actually sometimes we're pretty good at trying to get the best out of everything. So I'm on LBC's Consumer Advisory Board group as the Myeloproliferative representative. So if anyone's got any great ideas that you want to send through or get through to LBC, just let me know. And if anybody wants more information on the Facebook group afterwards, just come and have a chat as well. Yeah, what else? I think it was really actually watching patient power videos last year. I think you guys ran a session in Colorado, probably early last year. I might have been watching them in May, and I think I might have had them on in the background, was doing something else, and then all of a sudden my ears pricked up because Andrew said, "Oh yes, I need to be well enough to come to, because I want to go to New Zealand on holiday. And if there's anyone out there from New Zealand who's listening to this, well, we're keen to come down under." And so as a result of that, I emailed Esther and Andrew and said, "Hey, I hear you're coming to New Zealand. It would be fantastic if you could run a session for us while you're here." So they kindly agreed to interrupt their holiday for us for today. And so here they are, and they're also doing a session in Christchurch next weekend to try and connect with patients in the South Island. So it's my great pleasure to introduce these lovely people, such familiar faces, because for those of us who use the patient power resources, I think we know how useful and valuable they are. And for me in particular, as I say, I almost use it as my second opinion, that I know that I can access things like the national guidelines for diagnosis and treatment and so on, and that I know the care I'm getting in New Zealand is sort of kosher, and it gives me a high degree of comfort. Yeah, and so there you go. So welcome, and it's so lovely to have you here.
Can we stay?
And we are a small country, but and these are Cinderella conditions. But one of the benefits of New Zealand is that we are small and it's not too hard to connect. And everybody knows everybody who can help try and pull strings and make things happen. So that is one of our benefits, and we sort of need to use that to our advantage, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And just so, that's Esther. Andrew, married 33 years through thick and thin. We've been 22 years ago, through a routine blood test, I was diagnosed with not an MPN, but another condition that they cover here, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is the most common adult leukemia. I'd never heard of it, and I thought I'd be dead the next day. So now it's 22 years later, right? 2011, Esther was we'd been walking around the shopping mall, and for days I had a pain in my calf. And I thought it was something at the gym, because we go to the gym a lot. And I thought, oh, I strained a muscle, I'm not going to complain about it. It was getting worse. There's the doctor back there, she's listening carefully. And so it was about 10 o'clock at night. Esther fell asleep, and our, I don't know how old, 8-ton, he's pretty little, fell asleep. And so I called, there's a nurse line you can call at night. And I called, and she said, well, where's the pain? I said, well, it's in my right calf, it's gotten worse. She said, well, I'll have the doctor call you. And the doctor actually called. And there was a program, because Esther had worked at Microsoft, where they actually sent a doctor to your house. House calls, which is sort of gone away in
That was
the US
cool.
for sure.
Doesn't happen much.
Yeah. And I said, well, it really hurts. Do you want to come? And he said, no. He said, do this, stretch this, do that. Does it still hurt? I said, yeah.
And is it hot?
Is your leg, is your calf a little red? And is it, hot? Yeah. And I said, do you want to come? And he said, no. He said, you need an ultrasound. I said, when? He said, now. And I said, what do I do? He said, you have to drive to the emergency room. So I did. So here I am in the emergency room, and I thought, well, I had a sore muscle, right? And the ultrasonographer has this big machine, and she's talking to the machine. I don't know if anybody else is in healthcare. This is very weird to me. And she's talking and saying this. She's pushing on the different blood vessels, the popliteal vein, and the this and that. And she does my right leg, and then she starts doing my left leg. And I said, what are you doing then? My left leg doesn't hurt. She said, oh, that's the protocol. We have to do both. So the emergency room doctor comes back in after a while. He says, congratulations, you have a deep vein thrombosis, a blockage in your calf, and you have one in your left leg too that you don't even feel, and you're being hospitalized. Okay, so
3 times the charm.
So clotting can go with MPNs. And that was probably the beginning. So then I was in a clinical trial for a blood thinner, and when I got out, and then they said, well, your blood's kind of out of whack. And I said, is it the leukemia, the CLL, the lymphocytes being? I said, no, it's something else. And then they said, we're sending you back to your hematologist, who I had just been chatting with for years because his CLL was under control. And he did a bunch of blood tests, and then I went away. Took like 10 tubes of blood. I don't know if you've had that. They take all these, you don't know where it goes. And I went to the big blood cancer convention. And that's called the American Society of Hematology. Doctors, your doctors, doctors from all over the world go. And there was very upbeat news about this other condition, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which has been controlled for many people now. And I get a call from my hematologist back in Seattle, Washington, where I was from. And he said, well, I have bad news and good news. I said, well, give me the, he gave me the news first that I didn't have CML, chronic myeloid leukemia, which is not very common. He said, you don't have the Philadelphia chromosome. I didn't know what the hell any of this was. He said, but you're JAK2 V617F positive. I said, what's that? He said, it's a gene that's been discovered, a cancer gene, that means you probably have myelofibrosis. I said, what's that? Right? What's that? And he said, well, it's scarring in the bone marrow. Okay, so that was pretty terrifying. Now, at that convention, these pharmaceutical companies have booths because they're trying to get doctors to know about the drug. And there was a small company there that had just been approved for a drug called ruxolitinib, which could inhibit this gene. Take the pill and it kind of tamps down this cancer gene so it doesn't do so much damage. Brand new. And so the long and the short of it is, I said to my hematologist, doctors I knew, and they said, oh, your CLL, we have a lot to talk about, good things. Then I said, myelofibrosis, and their face kind of dropped. And I was depressed. The news since then is that there's much more going on. And you mentioned Ruben Mesa. And Ruben, I eventually interviewed him, and we're good friends with Ruben now. And he used to say how they'd have these MPN doctors in a room at a convention. There were like 10 of them. and now they're like 500. And they have stuff to talk about. So I think the theme of what we're going to talk about today is that we're living the change. And I know in New Zealand you're saying, when are we going to get that medicine, or can it be available for a wider number of people? Can the government pay for it? Can the policies change? And we'll talk about that today too, is the role of our patient voice or caregiver voice for change, so that you get the care that you or your loved one deserve,
Self-advocacy.
which is what patient power is. So I've talked a lot, but how many are familiar with what Esther and I do, patient power? Just raise your hand. About half the people. So, and you might be able to pull it up, Raywin, but it's a website that we started in 2005. But earlier, we've been doing patient programs since 1984, long before we ever had cancer. Multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, we were doing it. And then one day, knock, knock, you're a patient too, you're a care partner. So that's our devotion. So it reaches about 300,000 people a month. Either the website or what we do on Facebook or collaborations with Raywin. So how many people here have never met another patient or care partner?
What with your little disease?
Of any with these conditions?
Had never met anybody.
Never met anybody. Right. There you are. Welcome.
So a lot of what we focus on in the work that we do is exactly what's happening here, whether it's live or it's through joining our website, which doesn't cost anything. You just become part of our community by giving us your email address and a little bit of information about you. The driving force, one of the driving forces for us is not only education, but it's also networking, bringing people together so you realize that you're not alone, whether you're a caregiver, a carer, a care partner, whatever the right term is, or you're a patient, a survivor. And so a lot of the work that we're doing, aside from presenting videos that are interviews, for those of you who haven't seen the website, we go to the major medical conventions and we interview the leading researchers and hematologists for the different diseases. We do that, but the other piece that we work very hard on is developing long-term relationships with people who come to our website, who then receive e-alerts, e-newsletters that talk about the latest information coming out, kind of teasers about what the new information is. And we work to connect people through social media and through events like this. We do virtual events where we'll just get on to, are you familiar with Facebook Live? It's basically Facebook, you turn something on your computer and you're live globally. So we started to use that way of communicating as well, and then we have virtual meetings as well between patients and
It's all free.
physicians. And
It's all free, and you don't have to sign up, but it's helpful if you do, because then we can send you emails and correspond with you. About 20,000, 21,000 people actually have, but we reach about 300,000 in a month. I was telling Esther, if our Air New Zealand flight the other day from Los Angeles had to make an emergency landing
it didn't.
in the Cook Islands, I said, Esther, look, they're patient power members in the Cook Islands. We could have dinner with them.
There's
So,
one from Tonga too. which
yeah,
I
they're
thought was
all
interesting.
over,
One
or
person in
how do you
Tonga.
say it, Vanuatu? Yeah, I don't know.
We're not going to get any of this
The
right.
pronunciation. So, and we've been loving your country, and the people have been great, and you've been talking about a small country, but we saw this earlier in this other condition, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is more common, but still, there was a woman in the US who started networking on the very early days of the internet, Granny Barr Lackritz. She was a speech therapist at a high school, and she had this condition. And she started using the most earliest internet technology, this is what they call a listserv. It's like emails bundled together. And she started getting people together just about when we were first diagnosed, but she already had the group. And we started networking with people, and what that guided us to was better care. So we can talk about that, and please, we'll take questions and we'll chat here. So it turned out that the local hematologist that I had was not very knowledgeable in the latest for that first leukemia I had, which would be the same with MPNs. Okay.
It's equally rare,
He
would
was-
you say?
Well, no, it's not as rare,
not
but
as
it's still, leukemia is not common
Right.
compared to colon cancer or lung cancer. So, and this guy had to treat he was a hematologist oncologist, so he had to treat everything from lung cancer to hairy cell leukemia, right? The whole thing. And obviously, he had things that he treated a lot, and he was pretty up to date, and others that he had no time to really keep up with, but he was still pretty confident that he was a good doctor. And so he said, well, we're going to blast you with this chemotherapy, and we're going to start right now. So now we go on the internet and correspond with Granny Barb, the woman I mentioned, and she said, no, you've got to seek out these specialists, at least for a second opinion, to advise your local doctor if things have changed. And she said now they're starting experimentally to do a clinical trial, which is where they're testing new drugs, for a medicine that was being used for a whole different condition, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And they were curious to see, could it work for this other condition, this leukemia. And I mentioned that to my local doctor, Dr. Feldman, and he said, no, I checked and I don't think it's going to work and we need to start treating it. Granny Barb says, hold your horses, go to one of these specialists. So Esther and I go to Houston, Texas, which is still 2,000 miles from Seattle, Washington, the corner of the U.S., down to southwest. Thought everybody wore cowboy boots, and nobody wore cowboy boots. And we saw this Dr. Keating, and he pulls the 10 tubes of blood in the morning, and then we see him in the afternoon. We said, well, Dr. Feldman says I should get put on chemotherapy right now. And he said, hell no, right? And he said, you may not need treatment right away, and we'll probably have a clinical trial for something better. It ended up that I was on a clinical trial with the very drug the Seattle guy said, we don't think will work. And it did work. And one other point I'd make, tell them about Aton, how we ended up with Aton.
Well, I will, but I do want to come back to putting what you just said in context of living in a country like New Zealand, where second opinions and experts are not as easy to fly to. And
Yeah, yeah.
But the story about Aton, who's our third of three children, is at the time when Andrew was diagnosed with CLL, we were trying to have a third child. And so, of course, one of the top 10 questions we had for this expert is, are we crazy?
Should
He's
we?
now got leukemia. Should we just stick with the two and thank you? And that was it. And when we spoke with this specialist, he just looked at me and he said, don't worry about it. Go have your child. By the time Andrew needs treatment, we'll have something for him. And he gave me a big hug and said, just go have your kid. That kid is now 21 and we just can't keep up with him. So, it was one of those moments where that was real hope for us, that there were things coming and we felt like we'd gotten to the right person, and we had.
And we'd live our lives. So
Yeah.
Esther was scuba diving, I was snorkeling in the Bay of Islands the other day. So I thought, going back 22 years ago with the first condition, I'd be dead the next day, right?
And so did I.
In 2011, diagnosed with myelofibrosis that came out of the deep vein thrombosis, and I'd be dead. And here we're enjoying your country. So, admittedly, can you get access to the latest medicines? Can you get the best advice? We can talk more about that, but I think what we all have is today. There are no guarantees in life. But what we are seeing is there are a lot of people, and you work in the lab, right, doctor? Right. There are a lot of people working on this stuff, and more, and that's what we saw at this latest blood cancer convention, this American Society of Hematology convention I went to years ago. We go every year. And there are videos with MPN doctors from that meeting, which was in early December, that you can see on the Patient Power website. And I think you'll agree, Ray, Raymond, they were pretty upbeat, weren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
So I was talking before we started the formal meeting, I was talking with Emma and Raylan that, part of, perhaps the perceived barriers for all of you in finding out the latest or feeling like there's a lot of hope in the area of MPNs is that there aren't a lot of the top specialists here. And that it's a long way to go to get a second opinion if you feel that's needed. But what I just wanted to address that in that one of the things that we talked about was in looking at reputable sources online. We hope that ours is one of them. There's the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of the US, and I know there's the UK, which are sort of affiliate organizations where they have more regular access to the opinions and the documentation of clinical trials going on and new drugs in development, that in a sense that can be for you a surrogate second opinion. And the other thing that we've found is that those specialists like Dr. Mesa are very willing to work with local physicians, even virtually. So if you have a local hematologist who you feel may not know the latest, or you want additional information, the whole idea of being a personal advocate, advocating for yourself and saying, look, I trust you, doctor, but I'm hearing from another reputable source that there may be things that we both need to know about. And when I say both, I mean also carers, because I've been very active in making sure he's got the right information, although he goes 80 million miles an hour and usually knows more than I do before I can ever find it. But I would just encourage you to think about that rather than thinking you have to go to Australia or you have to go somewhere else, that to start with getting educated, whether it's you researching yourself or a family member. The younger people are really good at this stuff. Our kids are amazing at these things. To use some of the more reputable sources online as a surrogate second opinion and bring those questions to your local doctor. So I don't know if culturally that's a norm, but I think it's one of those things that being your own advocate becomes very, very important, because the speed at which medical science is moving, it's very hard for every local physician, not just in New Zealand, but we have the same issue in the US, that community doctors see all kinds of diseases, and even generalist hematologists don't see MPN patients or CLL patients regularly, that the patients have to take on a lot of self-education and self-advocacy.
You're the bridge. I wrote a book, I think it's like 9 years ago, and it's called The Web Savvy SAVVY Patient. You can look it up on Amazon. But we have to update it. But there's some things that are still very true, and that is, how do you work with your local doctor in a respectful way? And I said in the book, treat it like a business meeting, okay? So if you had a business meeting or some very critical meeting in your past or future, you would say, okay, here are the 3 things that we need to cover. You have an agenda. And these doctors are very busy, and you say, doctor, I want to discuss, can this work for me? Should we be looking at this? Can you email Dr. Mesa and ask about my case, and within the guidelines that we have in New Zealand, can we do this versus that? Whatever it is. But you or a family member can be the bridge, even in a system that's somewhat constricted in time or resources. How do you do that? So take a look at that. But I would say that it is a hopeful time, but I want to make sure, just ground everything. Some people are here and it's maybe all new. Is there anybody who their loved one is newly diagnosed? Fairly
You
recently.
or your loved one?
Pretty recent. How recent?
About 8 months ago.
Okay, so you're swimming upstream. We used to live in Seattle where the salmon swim upstream.
Don't take
spawn.
offense, he's
And
not
now-
saying you.
but I mean, but you're trying, or the other term is if you're trying to learn, you feel like you're, the term we use in the US, I don't know if you use it here, is drinking from the fire hose. Where all the stuff, these terms you never heard of, people you've never met, places you've never been, all this kind of stuff, you're trying to figure it out. And also you're wondering whether you or a loved one, whether these symptoms you're feeling are related, just getting older, or is it the flu, or is it this condition you're now diagnosed with that you've never heard of? So it's a lot to try to sort out.
And he still worries about that. We'll get a
Yeah.
sniffle or a sore throat. He's like,
Yeah.
uh-oh.
Yeah, is this the end, you know?
I get myelofibrosis as well.
Yeah, so there you go. So so if
It's hard to find.
if it's pressing buttons on, do you have these blood cells, too much of this or too little of this, or your blood is, you know, platelets are low, and if you're getting bruising, is it a one-way trip, and that's all that's happening. So there's a lot to worry about. Let's make sure everybody understands. When we talk about MPNs, there are three main ones. Essential thrombocythemia, I had to learn how to pronounce this stuff, right? So ET.
You're doing better with that than you are with the names of places in New Zealand.
Or the WH is being the F, yeah.
Yes.
And then polycythemia vera and myelofibrosis. So the big question, and does anybody, if you don't mind, this is a safe space here, anybody who's dealing with ET? Anybody here? Couple, 4 or 5 people. Polycythemia vera. Okay, and myelofibrosis. Okay, so it's about split. Okay, so the ET people say, well, will the T change to PV? And that's what's happening?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I think I'm PV, but it's not officially diagnosed.
Yeah, and then is the PV gonna change to myelofibrosis?
It's right.
Right. And so you wonder, are you on a highway? And if you're on a highway, how fast are you going? How fast will this change, right? And then is there an intervention that will slow it or stop it?
It seemed to be very hard for them to diagnose in the first place. So my doctor had been saying for about 5 years that I had a blood issue, but we never, like you, I was a bit blasé about it. And we were going away on a bike tour, and I looked at trauma insurance and went and had a blood test, and the insurance company rang me and said they wouldn't touch me, and I was like, well, why not? And I said to the lady, oh, my doctor said I had a blood condition. She said, well, what are you doing about it? And I said, oh, my doctor's monitoring it. She said, oh, with all due respect, Kerry, you need to be monitoring it. And I went, actually, yeah, you're right. So I went to my doctor and straight away got put onto a haematologist and sort of went from there, but it has now progressed to myelofibrosis. And so, yeah, interesting road, but being a bit blasé and now learning, trying to learn
But
about
taking
it.
what you're talking about further, those of you who have myelofibrosis, the question would also be, you know, how long is that road too?
Yeah.
And I guess the hopeful thing, and maybe you can go into that a little bit, is what we're hearing is that no matter where you are on that road, even with myelofibrosis, Andrew, you've been on Jakafi or ruxolitinib, is it ruxolitinib?
Ruxolitinib,
Been on it how long?
7 years.
7 years.
But the thing is,
More
we
stuff.
were talking though, is in New Zealand, you have to be pretty sick.
Yeah,
To
they told
get
me
it.
that I was nowhere near bad enough to go on it.
Yeah, because you're able to walk in here
Yeah.
rather than
So
hospital.
it's an issue of
That's the,
access.
so,
You've got to
and
be at
I,
a certain stage.
and I know with your organization, you're involved in advocacy with the government, and I think that's part of the discussion. The government's trying to figure out, well, what resources do we use for what? Do we build a highway, or do we deal with premature babies, or what do we?
And how soon do you intervene in a disease process? Because it's
Surely it's
costly.
better to intervene while you're still not so bad to halt it rather
You
than
would,
wait.
Yeah.
you would think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right, so that's advocacy, and I think you can work with this organization to share your voice, and there may be a hearing somewhere in front of, do you call it Parliament?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
New Zealand issue is a little bit more symptomatic. I mean, we've got a centralized funding and purchasing agency for drugs who set priorities and don't always get it right. And there've been in the last 3 years enough cases in the public arena where patient pressure can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
So the question really is
Yeah, it is.
whether we are doing enough
Enough.
in this scope here to actually be as successful as some of the others.
So the
Yeah, when
first,
ruxolitinib was finally funded last year,
Mm.
almost quite by accident,
Mm.
I would suggest. I mean, my understanding of how pharmac work with expensive medication that's low volume, if they're doing a big bundled agreement with Novartis, the drug company, sometimes they can just get a few low volume, high cost meds tucked in the side as a big fund, and so quite by accident ruxolitinib really got funded, but it's for a very narrow band of patients. And then we found out sort of at the 11th hour that this was about to be funded, and we ran a process of trying to get patient submissions in, and I think we probably got about 20, which was probably 20 more than if we hadn't asked. So that's actually what we've got to
So
do.
it's if you don't ask, you
Yeah.
don't get. So it sounds like advocacy
Yeah.
in groups like this can be very effective. It just has to keep the pressure on.
so giving Donald your name, and then ultimately learning, and then maybe an opportunity, it may be that you're in the newspaper sometime, or whatever it is, but you're speaking out can make a difference. Let me make sure you understand about these medicines. So this medicine we mentioned, whose generic name is ruxolitinib, the nib means it's an inhibitor at the end. And doctor, if I get any of these scientific names wrong, let me know, okay? Okay, but anyway, and then, so you'll hear as you learn about this stuff, you'll learn about MIBs and MABs. MABs are monoclonal antibodies that are used in a lot of blood cancers. They're like cruise missiles that go after the cancer. The NIBs are the inhibitors to tamp down these genes that have started creating aberrant cells. That's what cancer is. I had to learn at the very beginning, I remember this breast cancer specialist said, when you develop cancer, it's not like you had an infection, it's your own cells working inappropriately. And then you keep making them and they don't die. So the analogy I always give is, if you had a copier machine that started putting streaks down the copies and didn't turn off, and then just there was paper coming out of the machine everywhere, zillions of them with streaks, that's cancer production. Aberrant cells, and they don't die and they keep going. Okay, and that's what a tumor is. But of course, if you have a blood cancer or scarring in your bone marrow, not necessarily a tumor, but it's these cells that are operating inappropriately. What ruxolitinib does, but they're still learning, is can it stop that production, and ideally, can it stop more scarring in the bone marrow, or can it reduce it? And there's a debate about whether it's been reducing it, which is why some of us have bone marrow biopsies, and they, who've been on the drug to see, is it less? With the other conditions, it's are you developing still the wrong kind of cells? Too many, red cells, clogging up everything and all this kind of stuff. So the whole idea is, can it stop the production of cells that are not doing you any good? So ruxolitinib is one. They've been taking some other approaches, looking at other of these JAK inhibitors. Remember, said the gene was, for some of this is JAK2 V617, but in the last couple of years, they've identified other genes. MPL, I don't even know that much about it, MPL, right? And CALR was just a couple of years ago. So what they're starting to do is they're saying, can we identify with what they call genomic testing from your blood, what's gone awry? What's the bad guy? And these are called, it's more complicated than that. They're trying to identify not just what are the genes that have gone awry, but what's driving your cancer at that time. So imagine a car, a bunch of teenagers, and one person's driving. That's the driver gene. So for me right now, that's JAK2 V617F. I may also have MPL sitting in the back seat. okay? They're going to the beach. They're going to
I can't
pee hop.
apologize for him.
Now, it's more complicated because now hopefully we have a long-term condition. So they may ultimately want to do that genomic testing more than once because they can change places. The teenager in the front, Mr. Jack 2, gets tired, he's not driving anymore, or he had a beer, and the Mipple guy gets in the front seat. Now he's driving. And then should there be a different medicine? Because now there's a new driver gene. This is all what they're trying to figure out now. What's driving your MPN? Do they have a medicine for it? When should you have it? And later on, if something changes, do you need a different medicine because a different gene is driving it? The good news is this is going on while we're living fortunately, longer term conditions for the most part, okay? Now let's say you get more sick, or somebody with myelofibrosis, or me. Then we say, well, how do they figure out whether they should have a medicine for nipple, right, or this other gene, CALR? That's what clinical trials are. So do you have some clinical trials in New Zealand?
We do for other, but not for MPN. Yeah.
Could you get them interested in it?
I've talked to a friend in Wellington who she did advocacy in New Zealand for actually the hepatitis C medications, and she said that the new meds that came out for that are very, and I liken them to being quite similar to some of the gene inhibitor medications, very expensive when they come out, but hopefully lowish volumes in terms of need. She says that drug companies would love to come to New Zealand to do clinical trials because we're a small population, we're well set up, we've got good experts, we know what we're doing, it's easy to get access to patients. The problem is that the hospitals, the clinical trials, the hospitals generally are the ones that are not that supportive of doing them for something that, there's such a low volume in the population, or it's a Cinderella condition, or they've never heard of it. So I think, our haematologists are keen, and the drug companies are often keen, but sometimes, and the thing is, to have 2 patients in New Zealand when you can get, sort of 2,000 in the US, it's just easier to do it in the US, so we kind of miss out.
Yeah.
Well, you can talk about that, but I would just say that's something you all can work on, because I've been in 2 clinical trials, one for that earlier leukemia when the Seattle doctor didn't think it would work. I had a 17-year remission in that leukemia. Nobody ever had that before, okay, by being in the clinical trial. And then it was by being in a blood thinner clinical trial after the DVTs that they discovered the myelofibrosis. So, because you get monitored. So I would just say if you can work on that, could that give you an opportunity to tomorrow's medicine today? And then one other point I'd make is, given a small country, another small country is Ireland. So we have a friend there named Michael Wren, and his wife is Jan, and Jan has like 4 kids, I think they have, and she was developing the same leukemia I was diagnosed with. One of the symptoms, like with myelofibrosis, you can get an enlarged spleen. Well, with this other condition, you can get lymph nodes and you look like a chipmunk, and you have a lot of fatigue, all these other symptoms, night sweats, etc. And there was nothing in Ireland that could really help her. But across the way, in Leeds, UK, there was a trial. So they went to the Irish government, and working with the national health system in the UK that was looking for more patients for a trial, they were able to make a deal with the Irish government. They would fly her over, and then the National Health Service in the UK would include her in the clinical trial on a drug, one of these nibs, that has worked for her now for a number of years. So that would be the question is there something in Sydney
We could probably
or someplace
try
like
and
that?
cut fish
But
with Australia.
Short of getting into a trial, let's say that that's the gold standard. Short of that, if through resources that you all are bringing through your organization and through patient power, whatever, you're following what's coming out of those clinical trials, what's the results of those. Those are the kinds of things you can bring to a local physician and say, look, this clinical trial is showing, they're now going to approve this drug because this works for what I have, that's a way to push for accessibility. Like, I don't claim to understand the whole medical system here, but I don't think the problem should be insurmountable as long as you can get to the information. And then it's a matter of the funding.
And sometimes we have a thing in the US, I don't know if you have anything like it here, called compassionate use. So somebody's pretty sick, the medicine is not approved, or maybe it's in clinical trials, but even outside of a clinical trial, the physician can petition basically the drug company and with the approval of the government and say, can we make this medicine available for Mrs. Jones because there's some hope that it might work, but she's not in a trial and the drug's not approved. So I don't know.
Does that
I think
exist?
that happens. You might know.
Yeah, Dallin says, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but okay, so take it all back to you being smarter, being more plugged in, you or a family member, and having this dialogue with your doctor who wants to help, but is busy with all these other conditions. When you go in the waiting room, you're probably the only MPN patient, right? And there probably are not MPN patients sitting there too often. So it's all these other conditions, right? So your doctor, gets their head on straight. Oh, here she comes again. Let me think about MPNs, But it's not what they're doing most of the day or most of the week. So you have to help them. It's not that they don't want to help. It's just they have a lot. So we were at this American Society of Hematology meeting. They had a number of sessions on MPNs. There were certainly a few New Zealand hematologists there, but many more who were not, right? And they were scurrying around learning about lymphoma, learning about, many other conditions and trying to keep it all straight, right? And they go day and night. It's a lot. So you have to be the bridge.
My hematologist went to ASH last, it was
That's the
December,
meeting,
and I'm like, you have to go to the MPN sessions. And I checked in with them afterwards and said, you did go, didn't you?
Did he?
Yes.
Do you all have questions for us or things you
Look,
want to
we'd
share?
love to
We
talk.
I think for me, it's hard because I was diagnosed 28 years ago with ET and then later with PV. I was 23 years old. And in those days, you went to the doctor, you did what you're told, given your medicine, and you go home and you take it. And then you go back the next time, you do it, and you didn't question anything, and there was no internet. You couldn't look anything up. I just lived like that, 25 years of hydroxyurea and, and that sort of thing. And I remember back then the hematologist said to me, oh, you won't die of this disease, you'll die of the drugs.
Thank you.
Yes, wow. 23 years old.
Very comforting.
I've been on, or I was on hydroxyurea for 20 years for PV. I didn't know until a year ago when I read about it on the internet that it was even a chemotherapy drug.
Right. Right.
It was only a year ago I found out that I'd been on this chemotherapy drug, and it was like, holy moly, I didn't know that.
Well, MPN it was not seen as a cancer originally. It was a blood condition. And then they, just a few years ago, reclassified and said, well, it actually is a cancer.
And in New Zealand now, we're just in the process of getting PV and ET onto the cancer register to be recognised by the Minister of Health, or by the Ministry of Health as cancer conditions. So MF has been on, but not the other two. And my understanding of that is that can help with funding.
Sure.
And I remember my hematologist said he asked some American hematologists very early on this debate about, are there blood conditions, are there blood cancers? This went on for many years, I understand, and then in the US they tended to like to call them blood cancers because you got greater access to funding for research. And you know, there's a lot more money for cancer, whether it's treatment or research. So actually having them kind of classified as that in New Zealand now, and I think anything that's JAK2 positive ends up being reportable, will be reportable off it. So this change is just about to go through. So that
How
should
much-
hopefully sort of, you know, up the education a bit with
What do
general
you mean
practitioners.
reportable?
So it needs to be, so like at the moment in New Zealand, there's, if you have myelofibrosis, I think that gets reported to the Ministry of Health and it goes on a register. And if you have PV or ET, that doesn't happen. So we've got no idea of numbers. So when they're trying to work out funding and budgets and so on for healthcare, and you've got no idea of, you know, what percentage of the population is affected, it's actually, you know, it's just a really basic sort of building block to help.
How much access or how much is being done in terms of genomic testing?
Yeah.
Like when you are diagnosed, is there testing that's standardized that says these are the driver genes and that's not happening yet?
My understanding, so I mean, I think we'd all go off and have the JAK2 gene test, the kind of standard.
Right.
And that test was adopted in New Zealand quite early on because it's quite an effective way to diagnose very quickly, and it's not, you know, it's expensive to do. The genomic testing, to my knowledge, we don't even have the equipment. I might be wrong.
Well,
I think with
Auckland may
there is
have
some
just
development
got it.
in the research unit at Auckland University where they have got some technology for DNA sequencing, and,
Yeah.
but it's early days.
So it's coming, but we just tend to be, I think what you tend to find with New Zealand is we get everything that the US has got or Australia's got eventually, but we just might be 5 years behind the curve,
Big
or
lag,
10
guys.
years.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a lag.
Big
But just to clarify, in the US, it's not standard either. There is, we just on Patient Power in the last year or two, worked in collaboration with some organizations in London and in the US to have kind of a promotional drive to push to have that testing become standardized.
Precision medicine
precision,
for me.
Yeah, so it's not, I mean, you may be a bit behind in the access to it, but we don't have it across the board in the US either because it is an relatively expensive way to do it. I just asked about it because the way that research is going is going to match your genetic
Give you what you
profile.
need and not,
Targeted.
so
Right,
we're
so
all
it's
different.
targeted.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the JAK2 gene because I spoke to my hematologist when he said the JAK2VC, whatever it was.
V617F.
And I said to him, well, if it's turned off, can't you turn it off? And he said then, about a year ago, that they were doing clinical trials in the States and we were about 5 years away. And so you're probably right, we're quite behind. And the advancement in the US is much greater, of course, volume.
But they're learning from that. I mean,
Yeah.
here's the thing is, so I've been on this drug, fortunately, ruxolitinib, incredibly expensive, for 7 years, okay? And, but they haven't had maybe people who were in the clinical trials earlier or longer. So this is history they've never had before. And they're learning, well, does it reduce the scarring? Does it, turn things back? What are the side effects of going? Does it lead to other illnesses? They just have never known. So that's where clinical trials, people are sort of pathfinders as they follow people longer. The good news is history is being rewritten. So if you opened a book, went to some medical library and opened a book about any of these conditions, either they'd say it's nothing, which isn't to us, like ET when you were 23, don't worry about it, or they'd say myelofibrosis, and they talk about it being a fatal diagnosis within short order,
Which is not necessarily the case
and
anymore.
that history is being rewritten, either with some new use of older drugs or combinations, or with newer drugs, either in clinical trials or whatever. What's coming out of that is this genomic testing, which will happen here too, because it will be, it's becoming, the
Yeah.
Human Genome Project costs like $3 billion, okay? And now they can do full gene sequencing for a few $100s, right? So it's gonna happen, and then they're gonna say, okay, which teenager is driving your car, right? And then what do we do about it?
Well, here's another cool thing going on, and you correct me if I'm wrong. One of the things that I got out of being at the medical conferences this last year was that because they're sequencing the genes and they can identify driver genes in one kind of cancer, they're finding that that driver gene may be present in another kind of cancer. So the same driver gene that maybe, God forbid, I had breast cancer, somebody else might have pancreatic cancer or a blood cancer, and it's the same errant gene that's not working correctly, that's turned on or turned off, or it's on hyperdrive. And so at some point, I'm thinking, I love science fiction, that at some point you're not going to have breast cancer or pancreatic cancer or brain cancer, but you're going to have gene number X5942 cancer, and the drug that's going to treat it is going to be that. So what's the drug that now it's treating a whole bunch of different?
These are what they call the
Immunotherapy
immunotherapy. So one of the companies that makes one is a big drug company called Merck. So they have a drug called Keytruda or pembrolizumab.
That's one we've heard about.
It's a map.
But let's describe this for a second. So we said when you develop any kind of cancer, your body's making inappropriate cells, and they're not done, okay? And in a sense, what happened is your immune system, which has been your old friend, that so you didn't get the cold that the person sitting next to you had or whatever it was, let you down, okay? Your immune system, cancer is an effect of an immune system that didn't help you in that case, and it let certain kind of cells start churning away and growing, okay? So the very exciting thing in all of cancer research now is, can they, in a sense, reactivate the immune system to do the job that it didn't do before? First of all, recognize the cancer cells. So some of these cancer cells, it's like they have, what, is it Star Wars or Star Trek where they have the cloaking shield? You don't know it's their cloaking device. You press the button, boom, it's invisible. Okay, so they have this cloaking device and your immune system doesn't see it. Okay, so the medicines they've been working on, in a sense, say to your immune system, like to a bloodhound, that maybe you've seen this on videos that say, your immune system is like the bloodhound that's sleeping in the corner of your kitchen, just snoring away and didn't see the cancer stalking over there, right? And you take some rag with some scent, you say, there's the cancer, go get it, sniff it out. And then it wakes up and it's stronger now and it goes and gets it, okay? So in a sense, that's what they're trying to do really with your immune system, is reactivate your immune system, have it be able to spot the cancer and control it. And that's been happening. One of the great examples is in stage 4 lung cancer. So if, God forbid, and you may know somebody is diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and they say, put your affairs in order, you're not going to live a long time, right? We've met people who are living 10 years with stage 4 lung cancer, who are in the clinical trials for these immunotherapy drugs, where they could take it, again, super expensive, to recognize this stage 4 cancer and can control it. So the question is, and we've talked about it with Ruben Mason, sometimes, could these drugs for those conditions work in MPNs? I think in Australia they did do a conference where there were, well, you were talking about too, where there were physicians and patients.
So they did one in Melbourne, so it was an all-day patient seminar, and I think, is it MPN Advocacy and Education?
And Brazil did it,
yeah, and actually advert for Hershey's, they're advertising another one in Melbourne in October this year, so generally what she does is she brings the likes of Ruben Messer and other experts from the States, and I think those of us that went to the last one found it incredibly valuable and learnt a hell of a lot.
So you have that information on the Facebook
Yeah,
page
so we'll
and the
put,
dates
we'll
of
put
those?
that information up when it
Yeah.
comes out.
I think that Facebook, like Esther just quit Facebook because she thought
But that's
privacy.
personal, that has nothing to do with what we do in patient power, I just got
But-
fed up with listening
But it
to
has worked well as far as letting different groups, and this is a closed group, where you
It's really
can
valuable.
trade information and be in the know, and also where you can feel it's a fairly safe space to share your voice, which ultimately can be with, members in government. Maybe there's a committee member, and you can go with Raywin and sit there and say, here you are living with myelofibrosis, and here's what your concerns are, and shouldn't you have broader access to
Do
medicines?
you think our ambassador program might be helpful?
Yeah, why don't you talk
So,
about that?
one of the things that I'm trying to get off the ground, and this has to do at this point with, I need to get us at Patient Power funding for this. But we did a survey of the folks who are already members of the Patient Power community and said, would you like to be a Patient Power ambassador? And the idea of that was that we would produce supplemental education for people who raise their hand and say, I want to be fully informed about my disease, about the things I can advocate for, that I can tell my story to government, I can try to help legislation be changed. And we had about 500-600 people raise their hand and say, educate me, tell me what to do. And then we would use those people to do the kinds of things we're talking about here. So what I'd say is I'm in the process of kind of putting that program together and trying to get actually some pharmaceutical companies to underwrite it, because that gives them a sense of what the voice of patients is, because these would be very vocal people. But if any of you would want to get into a role like that, please, contact us through Patient Power. And as that program develops, we would be providing a steady stream of education about MPNs and about clinical trials that are going on, and hopefully do some education about self-advocacy.
I have a question for you. So there's another pretty rare condition in the blood cancer space, CML, chronic myeloid leukemia. Much less common than the other leukemia, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So it's your myeloid cells, which is not so unrelated to what we have. Okay, it's a myeloid condition, all right? So that's pretty rare, and they came out with expensive medicines. What's the access in New Zealand to see?
Access to CML, am I right, Carol? Yeah.
Generic
And
imatinib.
yeah, and we've had that thing in for a long time now.
Imatinib.
Yeah.
What
So
about,
that's the other thing.
can you get the Tasigna or Sprycel, the Dasatinib, or the, I forget what the other one is?
Sure, maybe you said you wanted that.
Yeah, okay, so there may be a model there. So people diagnosed with CML are usually younger. Okay, they usually don't have silver hair, more like when you were diagnosed with ET. And it used to be a fatal diagnosis. Okay, maybe you could have a bone marrow transplant, but otherwise there was nothing. And then about 12, 15 years ago, they developed this drug she just referred to, imatinib or Gleevec. And actually there was a picture of the pill on the front of a lot of magazines thinking that was the magic bullet that was going to cure all cancer. And the thing about it is it corrects one of these cancer genes known as the Philadelphia chromosome. So there's only one teenager in the car. It's just that one gene, not many. I hope I get it right. Anyway, and if you take it, you live, and if you don't, you probably are headed for the grave. So they approved this medicine, and now there are some more powerful medicines, and they've also been investigating, can you take these medicines and knock the disease back so much, almost in the situation you're in, where you can stop for an extended time or maybe forever. Nobody knows. And that's going on also in chronic lymphocytic leukemia that I mentioned before. So over in Melbourne, they have the Peter MacCallum Cancer Center. And years ago, they started testing a drug called ABT-199. They usually start with numbers, they don't have names. And what they found is there's a percentage of people who, with that other leukemia, can stop, right? Which is music to the ears of the government, right? It's like an antibiotic. Take it, you don't have the infection anymore, we don't have to pay for it, and go on with your life. So the question would be, could there be medicines for these MPNs, not that you take for 25 years, that you take for 2? Right? So that's
That would
what
be
we,
nice.
yeah, right, be nice for everybody. No side effects. Your disease has been knocked back, if not cured, to undetectable levels, and the government doesn't have to pay for it. So the point I'm making is that's happening in some of these other conditions. So in CML, there are people now who've been able to stop, right? But they did get the government to pay for these medicines for a while, and then they did this cessation testing, and some people have been able to stop. So that's what I think we can look forward to is first, can you get access to the right, can you be tested? Can you plea for access?
Yeah.
Can there be the registry so you know how many people in New Zealand have PV and ET as well as myelofibrosis, right? Can you get the doctors to work with the patients together rather than be dismissive, right? And then can newer medicines that are powerful be used with an endpoint of better health? But it's going that way in other conditions. So I think you can be encouraged, but I think you've got to speak out. In the media, one other thing is, so I have a journalism background, Esther has a communications background. Just a little PR advice. Could you work on a story so everybody wants to know, even if you have lung cancer, colon cancer, whatever, New Zealanders want to know about cancer progress. That offers everybody hope. Could there be a story about more rare conditions and how there is progress and you need access to the medicines that offer you that progress here in New Zealand? I don't know how much the media would write about this stuff, but in other words, being rare cancers can be an example of what everybody needs and deserves rather than it having to be for breast cancer or lung cancer. So.
Do you have any updates on the funding status of Pegasus?
So at the moment, Pegasus, as I understand it, is funded for some.
That's an interferon.
Yeah, so pegylated interferon.
For PV.
Yeah, so for PV, it's some. You can get it through.
Yeah, I've got it.
A NIPA process.
Yeah, I've got it through that, but I'm
Right.
not sure what's.
So what's that? That's a named patient pharmaceutical assessment. So individuals can get certain access to things that aren't broadly available if they meet certain criteria. And so like if they might have failed, if you're not responsive to Hydrea or the other things, I think you've got to have failed. As I understand it, you have to fail Hydrea, fail bisulfan, fail Angleride, and then it's your option. Or if you might be female and of childbearing age. We've been talking to Roche about whether they would apply, and they're not very keen to. I mean, they're happy to support an application from patient community or from haematologists. Anybody can apply for something to be funded. They will support it, but they're not going to do it in their own right. And it's one of these things, I think, where yes, we could put a lot of time and effort into it, and we may or may not succeed. I'm not sure. One of the things I've just sort of been thinking about, and after seeing the results that were presented at ASH, is another pegylated interferon that's just very new to. It's going through its registration process with the drug agencies in Europe. It's going through the FDA in the States. which is, it's called ropeg interferon 2 alpha B or something, and it seems more effective than Pegasus. It's also been developed specifically for MPNs rather than Pegasus was developed for Hep C, and they just happened to notice it had benefits that could be used for MPN patients. But so part of me wonders whether we should actually just try and convince Pharma Essentia and AOP Orphan to bring their product to New Zealand.
Right. So
But
Tell them how beautiful it is here.
in order for that to happen, first it has to be registered through MedSafe in New Zealand as, it's a safe medication to be used. Then you have to go through kind of the funding thing. So none of these things happen quickly, but yeah, so no real progress.
but
Still in the, it's one of those things we could do, and it's really hard to know. There's so many things we could do. And so far there's only been a couple of us really trying to work away at this in New Zealand. It's, which ambulance do we chase? Which is the best, what's the best
But
approach?
if you have a personal situation where interferon can work for you, and like she mentioned this ropeg, and we know those guys, that's Craig Zimmerman, and we actually did interviews at ASH about that.
Yeah.
So it could be that you personally, and Raywin maybe could connect you, there's some government decision maker who you could see in Wellington or Auckland and say, look, I'm living it, and the company maybe wants to provide it here. How can we make this available for people like me? Sometimes it's just, huh?
It's the only thing that's heard.
Yeah. Well,
That's a powerful story.
yeah, sometimes it's just the human story of you and what you're living with, and you can work with the association here to be. So I think part of it is you coming together today. Some people have never met another patient. Oh my God, I've had this condition. My doctor said, oh, just go on with your life, whatever. But there actually is power in advocacy, particularly when you're against this wall of access issues, or whether it's been categorized the right way, or whether in their dealings with the big drug company, the medicine you really need could be thrown in, as he said, because they're just doing business. They're not thinking about individuals, they're just thinking about numbers.
Yeah.
And I won't say that in the US we have the same issues that you do, but on a bigger scale, we have a very messy healthcare system where we have hundreds of thousands of people who have no medical insurance, so even if the medicine was accessible to them, they can't get it. So, and it's taking lots and lots of personal advocacy to get past that. So
our system here is it's relatively simple. I think our challenge is, we've got small population, limited resources. We have to wait for things to come down the cost curve.
Right, sure.
No one's going to invest when they're up here. When they start to come down, that's when the government might look at it.
But it's also, excuse me one thing, cost effectiveness. So if you go to a clinic in Wellington, is your medical record accessible in Auckland on some kind of computer system?
No, the DHBs often have actually individual systems, and some of them are the same, but they're actually, I think they're supposed to be slowly improving them.
But certainly Andrew and I are very accessible. We like to be, not just through our website, but if anybody had any questions directly for either of us or our staff, we're basically Andrew at patientpower.info and Esther at patientpower.info, or comments at patientpower.info. It'll all get to us, and we'd be happy to help in any
And
way we
we're
can.
also mentioned, we talked about this Facebook Live. So we are, or even some other programs we do that you've probably seen we use this program Zoom, and it's free to everybody, where we do this live broadcasting, which is how you were watching the Colorado event. So if you have a story to tell or want to speak out, we want to help you do that, okay? So maybe on your laptop computer now there's a little camera, and we can help you where you just sit in front of the camera and might be part of one of our programs. Or maybe we do something specifically with the association for New Zealand, right? that you can then have government officials watch, right? And like, why do I need access to this medicine, or what are the issues on this or that? Is that on the MPN section of?
No,
Uh,
Right?
probably isn't
Yeah.
actually.
So just
If
to
you go along the
understand,
left side.
Yeah. If you,
Well, yeah, it should have MPNs.
so the way the Patient Power website is, it has sections for different
There you go.
conditions. So that one that's on the screen now is specifically for MPNs. So there are interviews, you can click on it, it just starts playing. So that's one place to go. The other place is,
One other thing, on the right is join our community, you can register for online events. We have people that write a blog just about their stories or about research they know about, so.
And so, like, I guess I've joined your community. I get emails probably twice a week with the little snippet videos. You know, they're such lovely pieces of information to sit and to digest and watch, because you're talking to experts, but in a way that, you know, lay people can understand. And I find them really accessible, and it's a really simple, you know, it doesn't take a lot of time. You know, you might be able to sort of review the videos at the weekend or something. It really only takes a couple of minutes to just sort of stay across what the latest happenings are.
and then your Facebook group here, where you can talk to each other. So if I were consulting, what would I say is, okay, you have the opportunity as a carer or as a patient to become a smarter patient. Okay, that's the first thing. How do you get smart? You have a doctor who's super busy and maybe kind of cocky over the years, you know, maybe arrogant, I hope not. But at any rate, how do you help them be a smarter patient and want them to work in partnership with you, so that as you as a team, medical science is changing, whether experimental or approved therapies, how do you work as a team so that you do better, they're smarter as well, and they can also help other patients, okay? And how do you work on government policies that either because of lack of information, lack of data, is not affording people with these diagnoses optimal care? So nobody wanted these diagnoses, and you really, what you're always hoping is, you go to the clinic and the doctor says, take this pill and you'll be okay. And that's it. Unfortunately, that's not it over time. And it's also where medical science is changing, but it's out of sync with maybe where New Zealand medical care has been. So you have to be the catalyst, scientific term, right? You have to be the catalyst for change. You didn't ask for it, but you can make a difference. I don't mean to preach, but I mean,
Sure you do.
I think that's the case. So you may have to rattle some cages. But these guys, Ray Wynn, you all with the association, you can facilitate that.
We're so appreciative of having you make this happen. It's really wonderful for us.
Well, I mean, it's probably a good place to wrap up, and I'm sure people can have a chat to these guys one-on-one if they want to. But yeah, I mean, it was such a good opportunity to get you here, and when I heard you were coming to New Zealand, it's like, oh, we can't miss that. And I mean, we are small, and we refer to ourselves as being at the last bus stop at the end of the world, but we are actually, you know, we still can be very connected with what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think, you know, one of our advantages is everybody loves coming to New Zealand. Brendan Mason is an example of that as well. So, you know, we can probably, you know, our punch is probably bigger than we expect, I suspect, on the
Do you know the little engine that could? Yeah, why not?
Exactly.
I mean, why can't it be New Zealand?
Exactly. And I mean, we do that across so many sort of different sectors. We probably punch above our weight kind of internationally, so that's what we need to start trying to do.
You're doing well at cricket, right?
Yeah.
So, about going on with your life. So, you can be really depressed, especially the way you were told, with a diagnosis like that, okay? Or you can choose to go on, hopefully get the best care, rattle the cages we talked about, and do the things that are important to you. Some of us have grandchildren now, play with the grandkid, whatever it is. We're so delighted. That's why we're here, not so much as a bucket list trip, because we hope there'll be many, but we really wanted to be in New Zealand. And when Esther planned the trip, I said, am I going to be well enough to go? I didn't know, but we planned for the yes, not for the no. So we have a bike trip around out of Christchurch for 5 days. I can't pedal the bike as well as I used to, but I'm going to do it. And I'll go in the van. If sometime I get tired, I'll do that. So what? Right? So do what you can do, and I think also have hope, and then some advocacy for change.
On that, I'm just conscious of
Sure.
people's
Thank you so
time,
much.
and we said we'd be done by 12 if people have places to go. But on behalf of everybody here, and from LBC, I want to thank Raywin for her part that she played and getting everybody together in the group, and also Andrew and Esther for coming along and taking time out of their holiday. They have such a good holiday planned by here in Northland, down in Southland, everything.
Coromandel tomorrow.
You also you also mentioned that New Zealand punches above its weight in many different areas. One of them is rugby. You also mentioned a little country that you mentioned earlier, Ireland. This is a big year, hopefully, for Ireland. But
Which are you playing New Zealand though?
in the World Cup final. But feel free, please. I believe you guys are sticking around for a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll be here for a little bit.
Grab there's plenty more food, tea and coffee. Feel free to mingle, stick around. If you have any questions for myself or Em, or Raywin or anybody, we're around. So there's a little deck out the back if you want to get some fresh air or out the front. And if not, thank you so much for coming, and put your hands together, I suppose.
Thank you. And I have some business cards with our email address on it, but always Andrew at Patient Power, Esther with an H at Patient Power, and then that's the website too, patientpower.info, or if you just Google Patient Power, it pops up.
Thanks. And we'll give you some business cards as well on the front desk if you're not connected to LBC.